Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today is a continuation of my Unscripted and Unchained flip-through of AD&D 2nd Edition. Today I'm going to be taking a look at either the whole or a portion of Chapter 9 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, the combat system. So, previously, my videos in this series, and this is actually the 5th one in the series, but part 3 of the DMG flip through. What I had been doing was I was, just for the first look, seeing what the system entailed and just responding to it and going over it with you. This one here, I wanted to actually read up on the combat system because it is, really quite important to have a full understanding. And as I was going through it, I hit a portion of it that just, really hit me. It shocked me, or it certainly gave me some insight as to where some criticism of 2nd edition might come from. And so I'm going to read that passage to you in its entirety, and then focus on where it really sparked in my mind, oh wow, that's kind of a big deal. And then I will go into THACO, which is another one of the more controversial or complained about additions that took place in 2nd edition. And then we'll see how much farther we go. So, initially I was planning on, 2 or maybe 3 videos just on the DMG, but it looks like it might take actually longer than that because this book, even though it is thinner overall than the 1st edition, it is absolutely jam-packed with systems and charts and changes and such. So it does take some time to actually break down this game system, which, to its credit, I prefer game systems that are complex but modular, where, yes, if you want this level of detail, you can certainly include it, but you're also encouraged to modify it as you need to meet that general goal and of playability at your own table. And maybe that's where part of my surprise came in this chapter in particular, and let's get right to that now. So here we have chapter 9, the combat, and let me make this a little bit larger for you. So AD&D game, the AD&D game is an adventure game designed to give players a feeling of excitement and danger. Characters brave the unknown perils of moldering dungeons and thorn-covered wilderness, facing hideous monsters and evil villains. Thus, it is important for all players to know the basic rules of handling combat. To create the proper sense of danger and excitement, the rules of combat must be thorough, but they also must be playable and exciting enough to create vivid picture in the minds of the players. Combat in AD&D game has to allow many different actions and outcomes, as many as the imagination can produce. Knowing that anything could happen next because the rules allow it creates excitement for everyone. Creating vivid combat scenes. Since this isn't a combat game, the rules are not ultra detailed, defining the exact effect of every blow, the subtle differences between obscure weapons, and the location of every piece of armor on the body, or the horrifying results of an actual sword fight. Too many rules slows down the play, taking away from the real adventure and restrict imagination. How much fun is it when a character ready to try an amazing and heroic deed is told you can't do that because it's against the rules? Players should be allowed to try whatever they want, especially if what they want will add to the spirit of adventure and excitement. Just remember that there is a difference between trying and succeeding. To have the most fun playing the AD&D game, don't rely on the rules. Like so much in a good role-playing adventure, combat is a drama, a staged play. The DM is both the playwright and the director, creating a theatrical combat. If a character wants to try wrestling a storm giant to the ground, let him. And a character who tries leaping from the second floor window onto the back of a passing orc is adding to everyone's fun. The trick to making combat vivid is to be less concerned with the rules than with what is happening at each instant of play. If the combat is only I hit, I miss, I hit again, then something is missing. Combatants should be more like one orc ducks under the table, jabbing at your legs with his sword. The other tries to make flying tackle but misses and sprawls to the floor in the middle of the party. This takes description, timing, strategy, humor, and perhaps most important of all, knowing when to use the rules and when to bend them. When I was first reading that, I was agreeing with it all the way up until really that last sentence. And I'll read it once again. All right. This takes description, timing, strategy, humor, and perhaps most important of all, knowing when to use the rules and when to bend them. That's where I had a problem with it, is that for the first 3 paragraphs of that creating vivid combat scenes, the author was pretty much on point. At least I certainly agreed with the fact that, you know, your combat shouldn't sound like, all right, you're swinging your longsword. You need a 16 to hit. All right, you hit your opponent. All right, you roll your damage dice. You rolled 3 points of damage. Your opponent has taken 3 points of damage. All right, on your next round, roll initiative. If you're just simply stating the numbers of what's taking place, then yes, I fully agree that that is not creating a vivid combat scene. It is just putting out there the mathematical formulation of what is taking place. All right, but where they talk about when to use the rules and when to bend them, you don't have to change the rules, and you shouldn't change the rules, all right, in order to make the combat vivid, all right, and a very cinematic scene type thing. So instead of using the numbers, talk about what the effect would look like. So you jump over the table, you charge the orc across the room. That orc has just attacked the cleric of your group. So you are, you know, going towards it. And this is the player talking. All right, so the player could be asked, what are you looking to do next? What is your, declare your action. And so this is what the player is saying. I am going to run across the room, all right, and I am going to jump over the table that I know is in our way, and I'm trying to get to engage that orc that is attacking our cleric who is injured, all right? And so the DM now uses the rules to determine how effective, all right, or successful the player character is in doing that. Once the player character gets there, all right, what are you going to do now? I am going to swing my sword, and at the same time, I am going to try to interpose my shield to cover the cleric as well. So in case my sword doesn't hit, it I'm still using my shield to protect the cleric instead of myself. All right, so again, something certainly within the possibility of taking place. And so the DM will once again see not if it can be done, but were you successful in doing it? And so you would make, whether it be attribute rolls or attack rolls, modified attack rolls, fine. Player character hits the orc with his long sword, right? The player character is going to roll his damage. Let's say the orc has 8 hit points, and all right, you struck the orc doing 5 points of damage. All right, your blade cuts past the orc's shield, hits him in the shoulder, breaks through the rings of his armor, and you obviously inflict a serious bleeding wound, leaving that orc's shield arm practically useless. And the orc is staggered by your action. The DM hasn't changed any rule for the success to happen. The DM has just explained and described what happened in more detail. Now, if you want to include a consequence for that action, you can. All right, and that's not even bending the rules. That's just following through with the reality or the potential reality of that action. Remember, the PC said that he was going to use his own shield to help protect the cleric in case the orc is still going to get another attack. So if the orc does attack, that player character is either not going to have the shield bonus, all right, to his own armor class, but the cleric will, or perhaps the orc has been so staggered that it has thrown the orc's, a next action off, where the orc is now looking to turn and run instead of, because the orc realizes that he is severely injured. None of this is changing the rules. None of this is bending the rules. None of this is ignoring the rules. This is just describing the action in a much more cinematic, descriptive way in order to create that vivid combat scene. So, like I said, I agreed all the way up until that very last sentence where it starts saying, well, the desire for the story supersedes following the rules or supersedes your hindrance from wanting to bend the rules. The story is going to come out of the action and the application of the rules as long as you make it. All right, if you ignore that and you just stick to the numerical values of what you're rolling and then what are the outcomes of those rolls, then yeah, it's going to be a very boring thing that has nothing to do with the rules. That has to do with how the DM is actually handling it. So once I read that, I just came to a complete stop. I was like, wow, I'm really going to focus a lot of time on this, because I have come across a few conversations that I've had recently where they said actually second edition AD&D is where the gameplay started to go wrong. It's where the RP started to become more important than the RPG aspects of a role-playing game. All right, and the game is the systems. The game portion is the dice rolls and the successes, failures, and consequences or benefits from those successes and failures. So once I came across that, I was like, wow, I got to stop and go over this in particular. So I know I've spent some time with it. We're going to move on now to the next thing. So now we go into the combat. More than just hack and slash, and it kind of builds on that idea as well. So that as important as fighting is in AD&D, it isn't the be-all and end-all of play. All right, so they're continuing on with this. In addition to explaining the basic mechanics of hitting and missing, there are rules for turning dead, special ways to attack and defend, rules about poisons, advice for handling heroic feats, and more. So there's a lot coming up in here. The basic attack roll. So let's jump right into this here. The heart of the combat system is the attack roll. This is the die roll that determines whether an attack succeeds or fails. The number a player needs to make a successful attack roll is called to hit number. Attack rolls are used for attacks with swords, bows, rocks, and other weapons, as well as blows from fists, tackling, and various hand-to-hand attacks. Attack rolls are also used to resolve a variety of actions that require accuracy, throwing a rock or small target or tossing a sword to a party member in the middle of a fight. Figuring the to-hit number. The first step in making an attack roll is to find the number needed to hit the target. Subtract the armor class from the target from the attacker's THACO. Remember that if the armor class is a negative number, you add it to the attacker's THACO. The character has to roll the resulting number or higher on a d20 to hit the target. Here's a simple example. Wrath has reached 7th level as a fighter. His THACO is 14, found on table 38, meaning he needs to roll a 14 or better to hit a character or creature of armor class 0. In combat, Wrath attacking an orc wearing chainmail armor AC 6 needs to roll an 8. 14 minus 6 equals an 8. An 8 or higher on the d20 will hit the orc. If Wrath hits, he rolls the appropriate dice. See the table 44 in the player's handbook to determine how much damage he inflicts. So once again, to determine, you look at your THACO that is set based on your level, your class type, and then what you need to hit an AC of 0. If you're attacking an orc, once again, chainmail armor AC 6, you need to roll an 8, which is 14 minus 6. If the armor class is negative, you're going to add to the 14, making it harder. Let's say that armor class, instead of being a 6, is a -2. Well, now you need a 14 plus 2 or a 16 in order to hit a -2 armor class. Modifiers to the attack rolls. The example above is quite simple. In a typical AD&D game combat situation, THACO is modified by weapon bonuses, strength bonuses, and the like. Figure strength weapon modifiers, subtract the total from the base THACO, and record the modifier THACO for each weapon on the character sheet. So, yeah, you may actually have a different chance of hitting with different types of weapons based on whether there's strength modifiers for that weapon, or if you have expertise or specialization of those weapons, or if the weapon is a magic weapon and such. So each weapon in your inventory is kind of dealt with separately, which is a bit complicated. I can certainly see where some people might start arguing, well, THACO is a little bit too complicated. Wrath is still a 7th level fighter. He has a strength of 1880, which gives him a +2 to hit his attack rolls. He fights with a longsword, +1, so his THACO is still 14, because it's based on his level and his class, modified to 12 by his strength and to 11 by his weapon. If attacking an orc from the earlier example, Wrath would have to roll a 5 or higher on a d20 in order to hit. 11 minus 6 equals 5. Again, you go to the damage table. So strength modifiers, and they talk about them, where you find them and such, magic items and how they improve your chances. So pluses obviously improve your chances to hit, lowering your THACO. Any negatives make your THACO higher. Then there are combat modifiers. So attacking on higher ground gives you a +1 attack roll modifier. All right, so this is making so the attacker's on the high ground, this is making a +1 modifier. If the defender is attacked during the course of normal melee, I'm reading the wrong thing, I'm sorry. So attackers on the high ground, they get a +1 attack roll modifier. So when you're rolling that d20, you're adding +1 to it. The defender is invisible, you're going to minus from the roll, not from your THACO, from the roll. The defender is off balance, you're going to add. It's going to be 2 points easier for you to hit. So instead of, when you make your roll, you're going to add an additional 2 to that number. Remember, you're always trying to exceed the number of your to hit armor class 0 modified by the opponent's armor class. Defender is stunned or prone, you're going to add +4. Defender is sleeping or held, I skipped over this one, it's automatic. All right, so if they are sleeping or held, it's automatic to hit. However, they do have some attack normally hits, causes normal damage if no other fighting is going on. They have been slain or driven off. All others, the defender can be slain automatically, so it could potentially be an automatic kill as well. Defender is surprised, you're going to add +1 to your roll. So these are all modifiers to your roll. All right, missile fire, long range, -5 to your roll. Missile fire, medium, -2. Rear attack, so attacking from behind for any character class, is a +2 to your roll. They go into weapon type versus armor modifiers, which is an optional rule, and it really does get kind of crazy if you go into that optional rule. But here we have weapon type versus armor modifiers. So again, these are optional rules. So banded mail, you would get a +2 to hit with a slashing weapon, a +1 with a bludgeon, all right, but no bonus for piercing. All right, so these are weapon type versus armor modifiers. Brigandine is a +1, +1, 0, and so on. These are basically not numbers that you're making contact. These are modifiers meant to replicate that you have gone beyond the armor itself. So, it's the penetration of a weapon. So a slashing weapon against banded mail has a +2. Piercing weapon doesn't have a bonus, so it's harder to pierce through banded mail than it is to slash through banded mail. And bludgeoning it's easier to do bludgeon damage to someone rather than piercing if they're wearing banded mail. So this is how you have to think of it. It's not making the armor easier to hit. It's making the armor easier to surpass with these various types of weapon modifiers. Again, this is part of the optional rules. So you don't have to include it if you don't want to. Impossible to hit numbers. An attack might be so difficult it requires a roll greater than 20, or so ridiculously easy it can be made on a roll less than 1. In both cases, an attack roll is still required. No matter what the number the character needs to hit, a roll of 20 is always considered a hit, and a roll of 1 is always considered a miss, unless the DM rules otherwise. Under most circumstances, a natural 20 hits and a natural 1 misses, regardless of any modifiers applied to the dice roll. Thus, even if a character's chance to hit a monster is a 23 and the character has a -3 penalty applied to the dice roll, he might be able to score a hit, but only if the die roll is a 20 before any modifiers are applied. So a natural 20. Calculating THACO. To make an attack roll, the character's THACO must be known. This depends on the group and level. If the attacker is a player character or NPC, or the hit dice if the attacker is a monster or animal. All first level characters have a THACO of 20. For a character level 1 through level 20, consult table 38. This table lists the THACO number for each group through level 20, so players don't have to perform any calculations. For a character higher than level 20, find the improved rate for the characters group in table 37. All right, so if we look, this is the improved rate in 37, but let's just look at the basic THACO calculator. So here is your group: Priest, Rogue, Warrior, Wizard. At level 1, everybody has a THACO of 20. If it's a monster, at level 1 minus 1, so 1/2 or less, they have a THACO of 20. All right. At one hit die minus 1, so that's basically, 1 to 7 hit points, is still a 20, and so on. So if we're looking at that 7 again, level 7 warrior, you see there's the 14. All right, let's say, I highlighted the whole thing. So there's the 14 right there. That was the example that was being given. All right, now you can see a priest of level 7 still needs a 16, a rogue 17, and a wizard 18. The combat round, let's see what they talk about here. If an encounter escalates into a combat situation, the time scale of the game automatically goes from rounds, also called melee rounds or combat rounds. Rounds are used to measure the actions of characters in the combat or other intensive actions in which time is important. So rounds are approximately 1 minute. 10 combat rounds equals 1 turn. And that's a fairly typical rule that's still a carryover from AD&D First Edition as well, is that in combat your rounds are 1 minute long, and outside of combat you're functioning in terms or possibly even in hours. So time scale changes depending on what you're doing. What you can do in a round, and so here they're going to list all of the things that you could potentially do in a round. So you can make an attack, you can cast 1 spell, you can drink a potion, you can light a torch, you can use a magic item, you can move to the limit of your movement rate, you can attempt to open a stuck or secret door, you can bind a character's wounds, you can search a body, you can hammer in a spike, you can recover a dropped weapon. So the combat sequence, and let's see if they should have a chart. They will talk about initiative. So initiative roll determines who acts first in a given combat round. Initiative is not set, but changes from round to round. Combat being an uncertain thing at best, the character never knows for certain if he will get the act before another. Initiative is normally determined with a single roll for each side in a conflict. This tells whether all the members of the group get to act before or after the other side. There are 2 optional methods that can be used to determine initiative. Each of these optional methods breaks the group action down into more individual initiatives. However, the general method of determining initiative remains the same in all cases. The standard is to determine the initiative order for the round of combat. Roll a d20 for each side in the battle. Normally, this means the DM rolls for the monsters or NPCs while the players roll the PC's party. Low roll wins initiative. If more than 2 sides are involved in combat, the remaining side acts in ascending order of initiative. Initiative modifiers. If you are hasted, you are going to get a -2 to your roll, which is a benefit. If you are slowed, you're going to get a +2 to your roll, which is a negative. If you are on higher ground, it is easier for you to act first, and so you're going to get a - to your roll. So again, low number is better. So this is a reverse of AD&D First Edition, where the high roll goes first. Now it's the low roll goes first. And that is probably, I haven't actually gotten to it, but I've read several other systems where it's based on what segment of that round you're going to be able to act first in. So if you rolled a 1, that means the first segment of that combat round, that is when you're acting. So that first 6 seconds is your action. If the other opponent rolled a 2, that means they will immediately follow that in that action. Now that doesn't mean that everything happens within that 6 seconds. It's still taking the entire 1 minute of time in combat, but there are many different things taking place during that minute of time. It's not taking you a minute to swing your sword and to hit your target. It is, you're doing many different things during that combat round. It kind of goes back to that creating a vivid combat scene. All right. More initiative modifiers. Group initiative, optional rule. Some people believe that using a single roll for everyone on the same side is too unrealistic. It is admittedly a simplification, a way to keep down the number of dice rolls required. I don't mind so much a group roll, but then you add the modifiers of each individual character that would normally apply to that. So if you have one character with a high dexterity bonus, well, they got the group roll, but then they themselves, when it's their group's turn, would be able to act faster than everybody else. But they'll go into an individual initiative, which is each player rolls themselves. This method of determining initiative is the same as given earlier, except each player, each PC, NPC, and monster involved in a fight rolls and then modifies their own initiative. All right. Multiple attacks and initiative. This one I kind of like, because when I came across it, I was thinking, you know what, that does make a lot of sense. At least one of these optional rules is that if you have multiple attacks, you're not doing both attacks at the same time. You will get to go, and then somebody else will go, and then somebody else in their turn. And then once everyone has made their one attack or one action, and you have a second attack roll, then you will go and do your second. So take, for example, a fighter who can attack twice per round, and he's battling creatures that can only make one attack. The fighter wins initiative. He makes his first attack according to the roll initiative order. Then each creature gets its attack. Finally, the fighter gets his second attack. I like this because it does allow you to create that more cinematic view of the combat. Plus, the fighter, you know, depending on how you're doing the sequence of combat, the fighter might attack one character, one monster. Let's say he attacks that orc in the example, and he kills that orc with his first attack. Well, he's not going to spend his second attack attacking that orc. he might decide, well, I'm going to use my next action, my next attack on the other orc standing within that same melee combat range, or he might use a movement to go to and engage another, utilizing his last attack for that round. I deal with spellcasting and initiative. Weapon speed and initiative, another optional rule. Number of attackers and facing, so this can come into play as far as, you know, what your facing is concerned, and especially if you're using miniatures, this comes into play. But it also becomes a nice description if you can tell the players from what direction they're being attacked from, because it does make a difference, especially if you're being attacked from the rear and you'd want to know that, and you might want to make a turn in order to engage somebody that is attacking you from behind, and then it will change your fronting and flanking positions. Weapon length, the actual size of the weapon has little to do with the space needed to wield it, and all pike is 12 to 20 feet long. Since it has a thrusting weapon, it's needed virtually no space side to side. It does, however, need 12 to 20 feet in front. All right, so that's where your facing also plays a role in. On some facements you might have more room to actually attack than in others. Position of attackers and attack rolls. Besides determining the number of attackers a single character can face, the relative positions of attackers affect the chance to hit. Characters attack from the rear do not get their dexterity-based armor class bonus, and their attacker gains a +2 bonus to his attack roll. They might also be penalties if optional shields and weapon frontage rules is used. Hitting a specific target, we get into making called shots. All right, making called shots, it appears very quickly that you'll suffer a +1 penalty to your initiative when you're calling a shot. When a character does get a chance to act, his attack roll suffers a -4 penalty. If the roll succeeds, the called shot accomplishes what the player wanted. If the roll missed, no damage occurs. Movement in combat. The round is roughly a minute long and should be easy for the characters to move just about anywhere he wants during the course of the round. After all, Olympic class sprinters can cover vast amounts of ground in a minute. All right, and movement in melee. The base move is to get closer for combat, move close enough to the enemy to attack. This is neither a blind rush nor a casual stroll. Instead, the character approaches quickly but with caution. We have various other rules, so movement and missile combat. We have charging an opponent, so a character can also charge a foe. A charge increases the character's movement rate by 50% and enables the character to make an attack at the end of his movement. Charging a character also gains +2 bonus to the attack roll, mainly from momentum. Certain weapons, such as a lance, inflict double damage, the roll damage in a charge. However, charging gives opponents several advantages. First, they gain a -2 bonus to their initiative roll, so they can react faster to your charge. Second, charging characters gain no dexterity bonus to armor class, so you're making yourself a little bit easier to hit if you are charging, and they suffer an AC penalty of -1. So they also lose 1 armor on top of that. So no dexterity bonus, plus your armor is easier to surpass. Finally, if the defender is using a sword or polearm weapon and sets it against the charge, bracing the butt against the stone of his foot, he inflicts double damage on a successful hit. I go into retreating and punching and wrestling. I'm not going to go into that much detail with those there. Weapons in non-lethal combat. So you can see there's all kinds of situations that they're bringing up here, including things like punching and wrestling results, and just the types of punches and the damage that is inflicted by them, and if there's a % chance of knockout and wrestling holds and such. So as much detail as you really wish. Non-lethal combat and creatures, critical hits, optional rule, critical fumbles. Quite honestly, I think you should always use critical hits and critical fumbling. Parrying is an optional rule. Firing into melee. I know there's probably tons of us that have been hit by a fellow PC's, missed attack while firing missile weapons into a melee crowd. It's typically not fun. Taking cover against missile fire, grenade-like missiles. Special attacks, attacking with charmed creatures, limits. So again, innate abilities, breath weapons. They cover virtually everything here. They go into saving throws, and so various saving throws against that, and that's nothing new in this system, so I won't spend any time really talking about it. Magic resistance. Turning undead. Let's see if they do anything different here. One important and potentially life-saving combat ability available to priests and paladins is the ability to turn dead. This is a special power granted to the character's deity. Druids cannot turn undead. However, priests of specific mythos may be able to at the DM's option. Through the priest or paladin, the deity manifests a portion of its power, terrifying evil undead creatures or blasting them right out of existence. All right. So far, I don't see anything different here. Evil priests and undead are normally considered to be in league with undead creatures, or at least share the aims and goals. Thus, they have no ability to turn dead. However, they can attempt to command these. Yes, and that's nothing new either. Silver weapons. Hit dice versus immunity. Using immune monsters in a campaign. Creatures with powerful weapon immunities should be used with care. Yeah, you don't really want to throw creatures that need a +1 magic item in order to hit them against a first level party who most likely do not have any access. Morale, so they talk about morale here. I personally don't enforce any kind of a morale roll on player characters. I let them decide when they're going to fight and when they're going to attempt to flee. Morale here, they seem to be looking more towards NPCs. I don't need charts in order to do that. I basically just decide as a DM if the creature is going to fight to the death or attempt to flee, or on rare occasions even attempt to surrender. Injury and death. Let's see. Damage is subtracted from the character or creature's hit points. Hit point loss is cumulative until the character dies or has some chance of healing his wounds. Let's see when a character dies. Let's see. Sometimes no degree of luck, skill, or ability to allow characters. Okay. Wounds. Special damage. Falling. Paralysis. Energy drain. Poisons. Character death. Let's see. When a character reaches 0 hit points, the character is slain. The character is immediately dead and unable to do anything unless some specialized magical effect takes precedence. Death from poison. Poison complicates the situation. The character who dies as a result of poisoning still could have active venom in his system. I love this, and I never really dealt with this very much, but yeah, there's somebody who's dying. They're stabbed with a poison dagger, let's say, and the dagger did enough damage to bring them to 0 hit points, and they're still poisoned. You don't forget the fact that they were poisoned. So let's say the cleric is right there, and the cleric manages to heal you from your wound. And let's say they heal you 2 points of damage. So now you have 2 hit points. And the next round the poison hits again. You have now just gone back down to 0 again and died again. All right, so, and that will continue to happen until you have taken care of the effects of the poison. So you could end up there, healing the person, them dying again, or even worse, raising the person from the dead only to have them die again. So yeah, that's a huge thing to consider when when you as the healer in the group are looking at the injuries that you are healing, the people that you are trying to save, and you have to think ahead. Well, I know this person just got hit by the scorpion, and the scorpion's tail was what put the person down. You don't necessarily know if that person, that character was poisoned or not. It would be safe to assume that they are, and you might have to, just stand there and keep on tending to them until the effects of the poison are taken care of. So I really like that. There is an occasion when death is unavoidable, no matter how many hit points a character has. A character could be locked in a room with no exits, with a 50-ton ceiling descending upon them. Okay, all right. So that's just, no one's going to survive a 1,000-foot fall, and so you can put various things in there that are inescapable death. Optional rule, hovering on death's door means that you can go down to minus 10 hit points before your character actually dies. And I've done variants of that as well. I actually like to say that your character doesn't die completely until they are at a negative equal to the positives of their Constitution bonus. Never to be less than 0. And never, it could be less than 0. It could never be more than 0. In other words, even if you had a -1 Constitution, that doesn't mean that you die at 1 hit point. You still die at 0 hit points. You just can't go to -1 in that case. If you had a +2 Constitution bonus, then you can go to -2 Constitution. At -3, you're dead. Raising the dead, and they talk about in here, they talk about remembering that the cause of death might still be present even after you've raised the character's body. Mounted combat I'm not going to get into. Aerial combat, same thing. I'm not going to spend too much time with that. I just wanted to do really kind of the basics of the combat system. And there we have it. So there you have a basic overview of Chapter 9, the combat system of 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing, and share the video if you want to share it out there. And if there's anything that you feel that you want me to go back over again, I certainly will, and double check that. If there's any sound quality issues, please feel free to tell me so I can go back in there and take a look at it and do a revisit of that particular section if there was any kind of popping or anything like that that took place. Hopefully not. Hopefully we cleared up that problem the last time. And once again, thanks for joining. So I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. And as I said in my previous video, I'm going to try to get these videos out a little bit more consistently. So, not 3 or 4 days, but hopefully like 2 or 3 days. I know this one was right on the cusp of 3 to 4. So that'll be my last delayed one. I already have another video in mind. And I'll be taking another look through the DMG and see where else I want to, focus on for the next video in this series. So once again, this is part 3 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it is part 5 of the overall series that I've done with AD&D 2nd edition. Have a great afternoon. See you soon.